everybody, it's Dave here and Darren over there. We're your two old bloggers. Been talking about the Vikings an awfully long time. And hopefully this season is the season. Well, today's show, we're going to be talking about Kwesi adofo-mensah, our GM. He spoke this week, and a lot of things that happened during this week revolve around him. We're going to start off with, first off, looking at all the visits that have been scheduled and or taken place from the end of the college season until now, as of yesterday was the last time I checked, of players and how that Kwesi might divine, how we're going to try to divine where Kwesi's going to go in the draft with those visits. How does it indicate to us the direction the Vikings are going to take? We'll see if it happens. Darren, if you remember, talked about there's a certain percentage every year come from the visits. So we're going to try to dissect that and figure it out. Then we're going to go into This Week in Vikings Land and with a few bits of news. We're going to start off with McCarthy down in Mexico. Then we're going to go on from there to talk about Aaron Rodgers. I know it's a subject we all want to die, but is still holding on via life support. And we're going to talk about the rest of the NFC North, right? Our favorite division. And after that, we're going to talk about, especially with Aaron Rodgers not dying, what is the backup plan for JJ McCarthy? All next on Two Old Bloggers. Rock. Vikings First and SKOL presents This Week in Vikings Land with Darren and Dave, your two old bloggers. Hey, we're back. Your two old bloggers. I'm Dave. That's Darren. How are things in the Great White North there, buddy?
Warming up, Dave. So it's spring. Spring has sprung in other places. Not so much here. Still lots of snow on the ground and ice and all that sort of stuff. But we're getting there. Starting to get warmer. Lots of nice sunny days. And just gearing up for the draft. Woo!
Woo-hoo.
Can't wait.
Oh, right now I just look. We're 81 outside in Austin, Texas. And spring has sprung. Everything's turning absolutely exploded with green and pollen starting to come out, and it's becoming a allergy nightmare. But the birds are chirping, the squirrels are chattering. It's that wonderful time of year. And if you're single and young, hopefully you find love. But without that, we have the Minnesota Vikings to talk about. And we named this one Kwesi Speaks, his draft secrets, and his McCarthy bet. Is it enough? So, now on to theme one. And in theme one, eyes on the prize.
Yes, sir, Dave. We've got through mostly the free agency. That's the excitement from that has died down with the first and second wave being over. And that means time to focus on the NFL draft, one of our favorite topics, and going to do that today because and one of the things we don't know what the Vikings are going to do, right? With the draft, everybody's speculating, but one kind of a way to get some insight, I think, into what they're doing or could do, players that they might sign or they're interested in, or not signing, but interested in drafting and signing, is the the word gets out on players that they visited with and spent some quality FaceTime with. And so, Dave, you went to our trusty assistant Grok this week to ask that question to see what kind of a list Grok would come up with. And Grok, along with a little bit of digging by me and you over the past week, we came up with 31 players, draft prospects. And here it is up there that the Vikings have met with or will meet with during the draft process. Now, we'll be honest about this. There's probably some that we didn't hear about that the Vikings have met with as well. But this is what we came up with through consulting Grok and through checking ourselves. 31 names on there. Pretty interesting list. I think there's some names on there that are well known to fans of all stripes. Cam Ward, Ashton Jeanty, those kind of guys. They're well known. Then there's some other guys on that list, like Williams from Minnesota Duluth, the offensive lineman, where you're kind of like going, well, who is that exactly? But I still think it's good to take a look at these lists, because when the players that the Vikings meet with and during up into leading up to the draft, because every year, I can't remember a time since these I started paying attention to these lists of who the Vikings have met with or who they're going to meet with. I can't remember a time where the Vikings haven't drafted or signed as an undrafted rookie free agent at least one or two of these guys. So this list of names, there's going to be more that's going to come out, but this still is a list where one of these guys, maybe multiple of these guys, are going to be Vikings come the late April, after the draft is over and after the Vikings and every other NFL team have signed their crop of undrafted rookie free agents. And so I think it's useful to take a look at this and kind of see if there's any trends, anything that jumped out at me, and you as well, Dave, chime in as well. But I think the first thing on there is, of those 31 names, there's a lot of offensive linemen on there. 11 of the 31 names, big round bellies. That's 35% of the players on this list. That's quite a bit. And I don't know, that it sort of surprised me in a way, or it might surprise you if you're a Vikings fan, because of course the Vikings were very busy in free agency addressing the offensive line. They signed Will Fries at guard, and they signed Ryan Kelly to be their starting center, to address some deficiencies along the offensive line. But they also, and then they signed Justin SKOL as a swing tackle as well for their line. But they also traded away at backup Ed Ingram. They also released last year's starting center Garrett Bradbury, and they have not re-signed as of yet, and I don't think they will, Dalton Reisner, who was your starting right guard at the end of last year. So considering that the Vikings usually keep 9 to 10 players, offensive linemen, on when they finalize the final 53, they've got work to do, even with what they've done in free agency, to add some depth, and I think young depth, cheap depth along that offensive line. And that's why that's why you're seeing so many offensive linemen on there that the Vikings are either visiting or have visited. And also it makes sense in a lot of ways, Dave, because offensive line that's the largest positional group on your team. No other positional group do you keep 9 or 10 players from that unit throughout the year. And you're going to have to do that on the offensive line. And that's what the Vikings are doing. So you got to take a look at a lot of draft prospects in order to build up that depth, especially if you're in the Vikings situation where outside of like last year, they drafted Rouse, they drafted Juergens. Where are they at in their development? We don't know. Is a guy like Juergens even going to make the team coming out of training camp and preseason this year? We don't know those things. So the Vikings really have to do their diligence on the offensive line, and they are doing that based on these list of players that they have met with or will meet with during this time. And so that's one thing that stood out to me. Another thing that stood out to me was that you see 6 running backs on that list, which again is a pretty large amount. That's 19% of the 31 players that we came up with as far as players that the Vikings are visiting or will visit. And again, a bit surprising maybe, because the Vikings signed Aaron Jones to a 2-year deal. he was their number one running back this year, and he'll likely be their number one running back again in 2025. And they traded for Jordan Mason shortly in the second wave of free agency to back up Aaron Jones. So you're feeling, well, those are two 1A and 1B for your running backs. So why are the Vikings meeting or planning to meet with so many running backs? And I think when you think about it, though, a bit, Dave, it does make sense for the Vikings to focus on running back because, one, Aaron Jones is 30 years old. He's going to be 31 in December. He's only signed to a 2-year deal. Based on what we know about running backs and their production dropping off a cliff once they hit 30, there's no guarantee that Aaron Jones, even in 2026, will be a guy that you're going to be able to depend on to carry the ball 150 or 200 times a year. And what if his continues to get injured? What if his production just completely drops off in 2025? His salary cap in 2026 is slated to be about over $12 million, I think. Are the Vikings really going to want to take that kind of a salary cap hit to a player who will be 32 in December of 2026? You have to plan for the future with Aaron Jones and find a replacement for him. And even Jordan Mason himself, he only signed an extension for 2 years. So after 2026, he is also not guaranteed to be on the Vikings roster. So I think with Kwesi adofo-mensah, you look at the running backs position and you go, this is a really deep running back class. I don't think that he's probably thinking, I can get really good players, potential starting caliber player, even late in the draft with this very deep running back class. I've heard as many as 34 or 35 running backs might get drafted in this draft. That's a lot. So he can't be sure that in 2026, the NFL draft, or even 2027, when you're going to be looking for replacements for potentially likely Aaron Jones and possibly even Jordan Mason, you can't be sure what the running back class is going to look like in those years. You know, it's really deep now. Maybe Kwesi adofo-mensah is looking to take a bite at this draft class now to get a guy who's ready to contribute and be your number one running back or part of a committee in 2027 when Jones and Mason might not be around. And of course, the picture up there, Tyson Chandler, you also got to remember that his roster position, he seems to have fallen out of favor in Minnesota. We've talked about this a number of times. So is he even on your roster this season when all is said and done after training camp, preseason, and when they get to the final 53? There's certainly a case to be made that with the strong class and running backs, one of those guys you could pick could easily take Ty Chandler's position and be your number 3 guy. And then you can work with him and build him up, work with him, give him a couple of years of experience before he's has to go into prime time and really be a significant contributor to your offense at a time when Aaron Jones is probably going to be let go or retired, and Jordan Mason might not be around either. So those amount of running backs, I think that makes sense, even despite what the Vikings have done in free agency up to this point. I think a couple other things that did strike me about that group of players that the Vikings have visited with or are going to visit it with is Derek Harmon. He's a guy who the Vikings have. I didn't see anybody else on that list that where they have the Vikings have met or planned to meet with a player more than once. And Harmon is one of those guys. They met with him at the Combine. They've got a top 30 visit set up with him again. And also he played at the Senior Bowl, and usually teams check in with almost all of the players at the Senior Bowl and get some face time with them. So the Vikings likely have met or they haven't had the top 30 visit yet with Harmon, but when they do have that will be 3 times likely that they have met face-to-face with Derek Harmon. Interesting, because you see a lot of mocks that have Derek Harmon going to us in the first round. Now, he's a guy that there's a little bit of a division on where he will get drafted. The NFL draft mock database that you brought up, Dave, has him going in the 3rd round, which is much later than I've seen anywhere else. In a lot of other mock drafts I've seen where Harmon is either going to the Vikings or another team, they've got him going late in the 1st or sometime in the 2nd round. But he's certainly been mocked to the Vikings at 24 or a little bit later if they trade down. And so the Vikings there, with them meeting with him multiple times, they really are super, super interested in Derek Harmon. And again, that I think it still makes sense. Yes, they signed Jonathan Allen. Yes, they signed Javon Hargrave at defensive tackle to solidify a weakness, but those guys are not long-term solutions to that issue. They are going to be here 2 years max, I would say. And then it makes sense if you've got a prospect you really like that you can get early in this draft to draft him, develop him. He doesn't have to come in right away because you've got Allen and Hargrave who are going to be taking up a lot of snaps. And again, he's a guy you can ease into the rotation, much like the Vikings did with Dallas Turner last year at edge. So the Vikings either are really, really interested in Harmon with this whole thing of meeting with him multiple times, or they're not interested in him at all. And they're just trying to get teams to think that they're interested in them, but they've actually got their eye on somebody else.
Well, if they've met with him or plan on meeting with him 3 times, there is interest there.
Yes.
And plus, they're probably picking their brain over who else is good on Oregon's squad.
Correct. And there are lots of players on Oregon who are good, and the Vikings would be interested at running back, at offensive line with Josh Connerly, who's up there and they're visiting with Jordan James, the running back, he's on there, and a bunch of other players too on defense and offense at Oregon. It's no surprise you'd be interested in a lot of players on that team because they had a fantastic season last year in college football. So obviously they had a lot of great players, but that's the Derek Harmon thing. A couple other things with that list I think worth noting is that not a whole lot of, you've only got, and there's some blue chippers on there, right? So you've got Cam Ward, Jeanty, Harmon, Donovan Jackson, the offensive lineman from Ohio State, guys that are expected to go real early in the draft or early or in day 1 or early in day 2. But a lot of these guys on this list, though, aren't the blue chippers. They're guys that'll likely be drafted on day 3 or not drafted at all, or late on day 2. So lots of guys in that list who would be available to the Vikings at pick 97 in the 3rd round or later in the 5th and 6th, where we also have draft picks. And like you said, Dave, that makes sense because the way the draft is set up, the bulk of the picks are after the day 1.
Right.
So you've got
your definition of blue chip and mine are different. Blue chippers are usually maybe the top 10, and that's it. Then
I might be liberal
regular
in my use.
Yes.
Liberal in my use of blue chippers, but I guess I'm thinking guys that are going to be picked, particularly in the 1st round. There's not a lot of those. Yeah, not a lot of those guys on that list. A lot of the guys on this list right now are kind of more developmental guys and guys that you're looking at that will fill out the bottom end of the roster on your positional units. Might never start, might be just special teams guys, or will start, but it'll take them 2 or 3 years to get there. And those are important players to pay attention to as well. But and I like to know about those in the 5th, 6th round, later rounds when the Vikings pick some guy and you're kind of like, who is that? And, I like to at least be familiar with those names when the Vikings do pick them, which wasn't the case with Levi Drake Rodriguez last year, I admit.
Now, speaking of who's that, there was only one wide receiver on the list.
Yes. Dorian Stringer from Utah, you got his photo up there. And again, a little bit of interesting there because the Vikings, yes, they have Justin Jefferson. Yes, they have Jordan Addison. So you're set at 1 and 2, although we don't know if Jordan Addison will be playing the first 3 games in 2025, but we'll see. That
depends on the courts. Yeah.
And then Jalen Naylor, who did some good things at times in 2024, and then other times he was not heard of or seen of much. I think mostly because of the quarterback focusing and throwing a lot of Justin Jefferson and Addison, which you would normally do. But again, and the Vikings signed Rondale Moore, so there's a number 4 guy / number 3 guy that they signed in free agency. But still, is the fact they've only visited with or planned to visit with Stringer so far. Are the Vikings punting on the 2025 wide receiver draft class because they're very happy with their room right now? I don't know, but they don't seem to be focusing a lot of attention on it at the moment. Now, this will change. I'm sure that you'll see a couple of more wide receivers listed as having visited the Vikings during their pro days or or being brought in for a top 30 visit. But as for right now, Stringer's really the only guy that we have seen. And also no tight ends at all on this list that we have seen. The Vikings do need a number 3 tight end to replace Johnny Munt. They do not have that on the roster right now. It doesn't, and I would doubt very highly that they would draft a tight end right with the amount of picks that they have right now. And other areas of the roster, I think they should address. But interesting that, again, tight end has not been a big focus. Neither is edge rusher on this list or really linebacker, on the ball linebacker. But those are positions where that makes sense because I think the Vikings are pretty comfortable with the players that they have at those positions for the most part. The guys that are going to be taking up a lot of snaps and even the backups that they have at those positions. But speculation on my part here, Dave, but I think that these are always interesting lists to compile and to see what positions the Vikings are really honing in on or are really paying a lot of attention to and which ones they don't seem to be paying as much attention to, and how that shakes out in the draft, we don't know. But I think there's a lot of names on here you should be familiar with if you're a Vikings fan, because, again, some of them, 1, 2, 3, 4, we don't know exactly, but some of these guys will be Vikings by late April.
Mm-hmm. Especially at the bottom end, they'll be brought in as camp bodies and see if they've got a chance. Now, I want to explain the process went through to get this list. And this was all brought up because Denver Sox fan over on our Facebook site was harassing me about, Dave, you used to compile these lists and these pretty graphs and then put it all where they were going to be drafted, and then we go through the draft and mark them off and all this sort of stuff. Have you done that? And I said, no. So I went and asked Grok to give me everybody that's visited since the end of the season, the college season, from going from the All-Star games up to now. And that covers the All-Star games. It covers the combine. It covers the your top 30 visits. It covers pro days as categories that it was. And to give me not only the list, but all the links to where it's showing this actually happened, right? So I can go in and validate and prove that this did happen. And then when we went to update the list later yesterday, we went through and both Darren and I did searches on it, and we added a few more players that Grok did not pick up. There may be more that we just don't know, that hasn't been published, that we just don't see. And we know with the top 30 visits, those are going to continue all the way up into the draft. So this list will grow. And like we've done in the past, there's a percentage, whether it's a third or whatever, comes off this list. The Vikings visited them. Now, are there players that get drafted without being on the list? Oh, shit, yes. There is a very famous one. Harrison Hitman Smith was one. And there may be more. People ask about Gray Zabel, right? I'd love to have Gray Zabel, but there's no evidence that they've met with him. Now, did they scout games? Oh, yes. That I've got evidence of, that where they went to the NDSU games and scouted. But did they meet and talk to him? No. There's no evidence of it that I've seen printed anywhere. So this is the list as of now. And just keep it in mind when we roll into the draft here in, a month? 4 weeks?
Not even a month. Yeah. Less than 4 weeks away. Mm-hmm. I see that there is a question on there about the Patriots releasing Juwan Bentley and whether the Vikings might be interested in bringing him in because he has a connection with Flores during his time in New England. And hard to say, of course. I think the one thing, I don't know a whole lot about Bentley's game, but the Vikings, I think, do potentially need, like Jihad Ward last year ended up playing a lot more than I thought he was going to play. Dave, I don't know if you felt the same way, but when he got signed, I thought, well, I think we both, I know I did. I wasn't sure he was going to make the team.
Right.
He ended up making the team, and he was basically a starter for us. Now, how good was he in that role? He was kind of meh, and that's why the Vikings did not re-sign him, at least so far. But I think that based on what Flores likes to do with the NASCAR packages, the Vikings haven't signed a kind of hybrid linebacker, interior defensive lineman like that can play that Ward role. And maybe Bentley is somebody who can, but again, I'm not really familiar with his game. I think one thing that we have learned with Brian Flores during his 3 years or 2 years as Vikings defensive coordinator is he hasn't really brought in a lot of guys that were, you could call Flores guys. Like right. He's not brought in a bunch of like the guys from the Dolphins or even the Patriots to play on his defense. Yeah, Gilmore, and there's somebody else I'm forgetting, but he seems to be very liberal in, if you're a guy who can fit my system, I don't care where you played. And if I think you're a good player, good football player, I don't care if I coached you. I'm going to bring you in. So I don't know the New England connection, the Miami connection. I feel that perhaps I have overplayed that and overestimated that when it comes to the Vikings bringing in defensive players to Flores, because he hasn't really shown a real preference to bring in guys that he coached in the past. So far, it hasn't been an overwhelming amount of guys he's brought in as free agents to play on his defense who were guys that he coached in the past. And Bentley might be the case.
About looking at traits more than
yes,
buddies or people that he coached. Yes, I agree. Well, that brings us to the end of theme 1, and this list will grow. I will update it probably about once a week to see it grow until we get to the draft, and you'll see it incorporated in the draft coverage when we get to that. So that brings us to theme 2. This week in Vikings land.
Gonna go, it was a bit of a light week on Vikings news, but in some ways not light. And I first want to get to the J.J. McCarthy comments when he was talking to Kay Adams at that very nice looking golf course in Mexico earlier in the week. And now, Dave, of course, you and Tyler talked about this quite a bit on Wednesday on the Real 4-0 show, and I'm glad you did. But I did want to address it here on this show because I don't think he can get away with it. But it all has to do with, of course, McCarthy's comments where he was asked, where Kay Adams basically said, "You're the number one guy." And JJ said, "Well, they haven't told me I'm the number one guy yet." And the national football media really seemed to latch onto that as perhaps an indication that the Vikings aren't as sold on J.J. McCarthy as being the number one guy in 2025 as maybe they should, or maybe we thought. And then there was also, and I'm glad you guys got at it too, was I like that you and Tyler called out Stephen A. Smith and Shannon Sharpe from ESPN's First Take, who had a little segment about those comments as well that J.J. McCarthy had. And if folks haven't heard about this, but I'm sure most people have, I had quite a bit of a problem with their take on this as well. But the first thing about McCarthy's comments, they haven't told me that I'm the number one guy. Well, like Stephen A. and Shannon Sharpe, they latched onto this, and their take was that they tried to make McCarthy out to be some sort of diva.
Some spoiled little brat. Yes.
Yeah. That these comments indicated that he was somehow getting it out there, or that it made it sound like he was upset that the Vikings and Kevin O'Connell and the Vikings offensive brain thrust haven't told him and anointed him as a starter in 2025. And I just felt that was I told you, Dave, was a dumb take by both of them. And I'll admit, I like Stephen A. Smith. I think he's a pretty good arguer, very good at what he does. But he knows how the game is played on this. He is there to give strong opinions, yell as loud as he possibly can, and give the hottest takes he possibly can within reason. And he knows that that's why he's employed at ESPN and why he has a large viewership, because people tune in to see what Stephen A. has said next. But I don't think that he's one of these guys. He's not like I can't think of his name right now, and why can't I? The older guy used to work with Stephen A. Smith. But
yes, and they used to go at it all the time.
Yeah, but I'm just drawing a blank right now. But Stephen A. Smith is not a guy who likes to be shown that he's a buffoon or wrong in his takes. He usually takes strong takes, but a lot of times there's a lot of thought put behind them, I think, and they're not unreasonable. But in this case, like, he's not one to really, I think, make a completely outrageous hot take just to drive viewership. He wants there to be some substance behind what he's saying. But in this case, I think in this case,
Bayless. Thank you,
Skip Bayless. Yes. But Bayless is terrible. But I think in this case, the researchers or the producers of this show did not show Stephen A. or Shannon Sharpe the full comments that JJ McCarthy did, because if they had, they would have seen that what McCarthy said was not diva behavior, not even close. Like, what JJ McCarthy said was, I felt, and this is how you interpreted it too, Dave, is he was saying this, he was doing the same thing he's done every time since he's become a Viking, since they drafted him 10th overall. And that is, he's showing humility. He's showing he's a team first guy. He's showing that he is going to outwork everybody, and he's not taking anything for granted. And that's what he was saying in these comments, I think, was that, hey, I'm not, JJ McCarthy is not into entitlements. He's into proving that what he gets, he's earned it. And that's what those comments were. There's no NFL team that is going to, I think, and this is back to the first point where he talked about how he had not been told he's the number one guy. It's very rare that NFL teams say to a young quarterback, even guys that are drafted first overall or second overall that I can remember, they rarely say to them right off the bat, you are the number one guy. You're going to start from day one. They at least say there's going to be a competition. So the fact that the Vikings haven't told JJ McCarthy yet he's the number one guy is not unusual, and I don't think it's a big deal. And JJ McCarthy I don't think that he wants to be told he's the number one guy. He wants to at least earn it. And that is exactly what he is going to do this spring in OTAs, in training camp, in the preseason, is he's going to earn it. And he's going to prove to everybody that he is the number one guy and he's the right guy for the job.
Without a doubt. What they did, I thought, was malpractice.
It was a hacky
job. went on about it, and it was bad. And I did another Kay Adams shot because I like Kay Adams. It's a wonderful thing. And I thought he dealt with the questions from Kay just perfectly. That's what I want from a young quarterback. Stephen A. Smith and Shannon Sharpe were just...
They were wrong on that one. Yeah, and if you're a teammate of JJ McCarthy, I don't think you really want him going out and saying, yeah, I'm the number one guy. You want him to say, listen, I got to earn this with the coaching staff. I got to prove to them that I'm worthy of being the number one guy. I got to prove it to my teammates that I'm the number one guy. And that is what he said. And that is, there's no other way to interpret it, but it did get interpreted other ways, which is why you and I and Tyler and lots of other people on this chat were just shaking our head at how those small little comments ended up getting blown up into something much bigger, and they just took it completely the wrong way.
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly. Just like a whole bunch of Aaron Rodgers comments were taken the wrong way, but we'll get to that.
Yes, we will.
Oh.
In the next segment, actually.
And Mary says they were even the ones pumping that drama.
Yes, they were.
But hey, we'll see. Now, speaking of the next segment.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Kwesi adofo-mensah had his media availability finally on Wednesday, which was of great interest to you and me and most Vikings fans. And again, a lot of things he said, you talked about it on Wednesday on your show, you and Tyler as well. You were a bit disappointed with the questions that he got asked, which focused a lot on Rodgers. And this has been gone over quite a bit over since between when the press conference happened and now. So do I have any unique takes on those comments? Not really. I do, though, understand why the reporters peppered Kwesi adofo-mensah with questions about Aaron Rodgers, because in my opinion, despite all that else that's gone on, this is still the number one thing on most Viking fans' minds. Whether you want Rodgers to come in, which I don't really sense is what most Viking fans want, or you don't want him to come to Minnesota. It's still been a very hot topic and one that keeps on debated. And I know it's annoying to keep on talking about it when there's a 99.9999% chance that it's not going to happen. But if you're a reporter, you're going to ask those questions. And if you don't like the answers you get, or you think some of the answers are vague, you're going to keep on asking them. And by asking those questions, we did find out that the Vikings did actually talk to Aaron Rodgers. Kevin O'Connell talked to him. And so that was something that was debated during this whole thing. Did the Vikings even talk to Aaron Rodgers? And how serious were those talks? We don't know that, but at least it did confirm that there were talks with him now. And I'm sure that Kevin O'Connell was not talking to Aaron Rodgers about his next darkness retreat. They had to be about something to do with being, his football state of mind, what his plans were, maybe even what would he consider? Would he consider playing with the Vikings and what those terms might be? But interesting, because Kevin O'Connell, I believe, is going to talk to the media this week at the league meetings. And so guess what he's going to get asked about? Reporters are going to want to drill down more into, well, did you call Rodgers or did Rodgers call you? And what did you talk about? And did you ever consider bringing him in to be the starter this year and sit JJ McCarthy? He's going to get all of that in a couple of days. And this is going to continue to cycle this whole story.
Be part of the soap opera. Yes,
indeed. But so, I felt Kwesi adofo-mensah handled the questions pretty well, and he did his best to tamp down on this by talking about how JJ McCarthy has passed every test that they've given him so far. But he also didn't rule out that they would bring in somebody like Aaron Rodgers. And I think, as much as, again, we find it annoying, I think that was wise by Kwesi adofo-mensah, because he can't predict the future. And the last thing you want to do when you're one of the spokesperson for an NFL franchise is to say, absolutely, without a doubt, we aren't going to do something. And then JJ McCarthy's leg gets blown off. And then you end up doing what you said you weren't going to do. And that's just something general managers rarely are going to say absolutely 100% not going to happen, because you never know what's going to happen in the NFL, especially with the injuries that a lot of players have. So Kwesi adofo-mensah did not 100% rule it out. Does it mean it's going to happen? Of course not. It is probably not going to happen. The only way it's going to happen, again, is if McCarthy sustains some, and God forbid it happens, some major injury that keeps him out for the entire year. Then, of course, the Vikings will be scrambling, and they will be looking for somebody like Aaron Rodgers with a resume, somebody who can keep a roster that looks like it's ready to win now, in playoff contention, in Super Bowl contention. But so Kwesi adofo-mensah, him not ruling this out 100%, I don't think it's a big deal. But this is going to continue to be a storyline until Rodgers signs with somebody else. It's just the way it's going to be.
And we're going to hear more about it, because you're right. They have the league meetings this week, and KOC and both KOC and Cam are going to be in pressers, especially with the local guys. So
yeah, and it'll be quite interesting to see how KOC approaches answering those questions. How vague he is, I think he'll be very vague. But I think you're going to hear lots of platitudes about Aaron Rodgers and what a great player he is and what a great person he is and what a great relationship KOC has with him. But you won't get much about who initiated what and what was he isn't going to give a blow by blow on what they talked about.
Now, it would be funny if he came out and goes, "Oh, I was asking him about his darkness retreats."
Yeah.
But it's going to be interesting.
And one thing that Kwesi adofo-mensah said, which is also important, is that, he said, we don't lie to people. And that's another reason why he's not going to 100% rule out this possibility, because, again, if you say something, unequivocally say something isn't going to happen, and it does, then everything you say after that, fans and the media are going to have a hard time believing anything you say after that. So it's not wise for a general manager or head coach to give these 100%, it ain't going to happen kind of answers to these questions.
Right. It is. Speaking of head coaches, there's 3 other head coaches in the division, and they've been doing a little bit of work too.
Yeah, the Vikings, of course, were super busy in free agency. They spent the most amount of, or committed the most amount of cash of any NFL team during free agency. But yes, there's 3 other teams in the NFC North, and they were also active in free agency as well. Some more than others. And really, with the NFC North, I think you could break it into 2 and 2. You had 2 teams, the Bears and the Vikings, who were very active trading for players and then acquiring players from outside their organization to join their organization. And then you had 2 teams, the Lions and the Green Bay Packers, who didn't do that. Like, they focused more on bringing in, retaining their own free agents and made very little waves in free agency. And first off, I want to talk about the Bears. We know that they addressed their offensive line issues mostly through the trades, though, by getting Joe Thuney in and also Jonah Jackson. And then they did sign Drew Dahlman during free agency. They didn't do much to address issues at wide receiver or running back. They didn't do a whole lot to address getting more pass rush help for Montez Sweat. So when you look at what the Chicago did, they were very busy, but a lot of it, the big moves were on the offensive line, and
which they needed.
They needed it, although you have heard at times that the Bears gave up a ton of sacks last year. Caleb Williams was sacked way too much for your liking if you're a Bears fan, but there's also been NFL analysts who have said that a lot of those sacks, like you talked about in the past, Dave, were on Williams. They weren't on the offensive line so much. So it does raise the question of, did the Bears solve their problem by investing in Thuney and Jackson and Dahlman when the problem wasn't really the guys they had before? The problem was the rookie quarterback who holds onto the ball forever and likes to scramble around and make plays and ends up taking a lot of sacks. So it remains to be seen whether what they did on the offensive line in particular will move the needle enough for them to make them a much better team in 2025. But they did address it, and they were busy. Green Bay Packers. They've done in free agency what they've done since Ted Thompson was their general manager starting in 2005. And that is...
But Gutekunst now is moving the needle just a tad.
A tad. But I think he's still very much... The Packers still remain very much a draft and develop team that doesn't participate very much in free agency. Now, they did make a couple of significant moves in free agency. They signed Aaron Banks at guard to not an insignificant amount of money, although Banks is considered a mediocre guard at best. So I don't know if that was a great move by them. They also signed slot corner Nate Hobbs from the Raiders to add to their cornerback room. But otherwise, it was a lot of, again, retaining their own in-house free agents. And it seems like the Bears are doing what they have done for a long, long time, and that is they're going to depend on Matt LaFleur and his coaching staff to coach up a very young roster and have a lot of those guys get better and rise in their level of play. And it's hard to argue with that approach when you looked at the fact that the Packers have made the playoffs every season that LaFleur has been a head coach except for one. Now, a lot of those years were with Aaron Rodgers playing quarterback. So, but they have made the playoffs 2 straight years with Jordan Love as their quarterback as well. So,
which is surprising, but well, it is.
We'll see if that continues. But that's kind of the Bears in free agency. Not as nearly as many splash moves as what the Vikings did or even the Bears did. You look at the Lions, and what they did is really Brad Holmes, the general manager. It looks like he basically bet on his roster, very young, stacked roster. He bet on a roster that went 15-2 in the regular season last year, was the number 1 seed in the NFC Championship game, and then they picked a bad time to play one of their worst games of the year, but also their defense had almost nobody left. That even their backups were all injured. But they did make a major move, and that their biggest move was they swapped out Carlton Davis, who left for the Patriots for big money, for DJ Reed. Pretty good move by the Lions, I think, because Reed's probably a better player than Davis, and they signed into a contract which I think was a little cheaper than Carlton Davis signed with the Patriots. So that's a pretty good move by Brad Holmes there. But otherwise, they basically brought they re-signed a ton of their own guys, depth guys, low-end starters, and again, betting on their own roster and betting that better health will lead to the same or even better results in 2025 for them. Will it work or not? We don't know. Again, the Vikings overall were one of the busiest teams in free agency, certainly probably the busiest in the NFC North. Did they do enough to move the needle and get to challenge again for the NFC North title and make the playoffs again? I think as fans, we think they did. Vegas doesn't seem to quite agree, because Vegas came out with its win totals for the NFL this week, and they got the Vikings sitting at 8.5 wins this year. And also, they've got them as being the least likely odds to win the NFC North. So We'll see if that works out, Dave. Vegas was wrong last year about the Vikings, and I'm hoping that they are wrong again in 2025. And I think they will be.
And I think they will be too. I think 8.5, it's 500. They're betting on JJ McCarthy, not knowing who he is and listening to the national press like Stephen A. And they just don't know. And so they're not going to put him above even the Bears. And there's probably a missing decimal points in there. And they're not putting them above the Packers. But the Packers are only 1 game above, and I think that's crazy. I've already said on all my shows that I think the Packers are going to finish last in the division in this coming up year. But we'll find out. Can the Bears, pull it together? Will Ben Johnson and half the Detroit staff moving to Chicago make the difference in Chicago? Will half that staff that moved to Chicago make a huge difference in a hole in Detroit? We're going to find out this season, and it's going to be fun to watch, I think. And we all play the same teams for the most part all season long. It's going to be a tougher schedule. But we are still, at least on paper, one of the toughest teams in toughest divisions in the NFL. So it will be easy. It will be fun. And it won't be easy. I hope it is. I hope JJ McCarthy makes it look easy, which is going to be fun. But we'll find out.
And the Bulldogs saying that there's LLC is talking about how there's no baseline for McCarthy, so Vegas is hedging, which is true, 100%. And then
where did they have Washington last year?
Yeah,
I think they were low numbers. Yeah,
but they wouldn't have been super high, right. And that's just the way it goes when you're going to probably be starting a quarterback who has not played in the NFL before. It's going to be hard for Vegas and a lot of people from the outside to really believe in that quarterback being able to play well enough to take a team to the playoffs and win a divisional title and go deep in the playoffs. But we did see last year, Jaden Daniels did it. And, Bo Nix got the Broncos to the playoffs. most of the rookie class, played quarterback class, played pretty well to either had a very good years, outstanding years, or even solid years for the most part. And again, I think last week we talked about J.J. McCarthy and what his stats might be in 2025. And I think we're pretty bullish on his ability to replicate at least a bit some of the things that Daniels and Nix and Drake May did, even though he didn't start the whole year, but he seemed to do pretty well considering what he had to work with in New England.
Right. And I sent you a clip of Jaden Daniels was asked about who's of the class, who's going to be his biggest competition. And his response was easy. It's going to be J.J. McCarthy. And foregoing Nix and Penix and Caleb Williams, which I thought was interesting. But, hey, cool. All right. That brings us to the end of Theme 2. And what comes after Theme 2?
Theme 3.
All right, here we go with the backup plan.
Yes, just talked a whole bunch about free agency and what the Vikings did and what the NFC North teams did. And of course, Vikings, again, very busy in free agency so far. Addressed lots of positional weaknesses on the team. One that they haven't addressed yet, though, is the backup quarterback position. And Dave, you have been very hopeful, I think, or at least interested in the Vikings signing Ryan Tannehill as the backup quarterback for Minnesota in 2025, the backup to J.J. McCarthy. And the Vikings seem to be somewhat interested in that as well. There are reports coming out that they've had some discussions with Tannehill about coming to Minnesota. But this week, Ian Rappaport made some comments that cast some doubt on whether the Vikings will be able to get Tannehill to come to Minnesota. And Rappaport was talking about how that, in his view and what he's heard, is that Tannehill's looking to come to an awesome team with awesome weapons where he can get decent bridge quarterback money in 2025 if he's going to play for anybody. Suggesting also that decent bridge quarterback money means he's going to start, or at least be given the chance to start wherever.
Decent bridge money, what is that? $10 to $12 million? 15? Somewhere in there.
Yeah, I would say somewhere between 12 and 15 with the salary cap going up. I think that's maybe a little bit higher, depending on your view of what decent money is. Mm-hmm. But yeah, if those are kind of comments that I think doused the flames a bit on Tannehill being a backup option in Minnesota, because if he's looking to go to a team to be a bridge starting quarterback, or at least have the opportunity to be a starting quarterback, I don't think that opportunity is going to happen in Minnesota with J.J. McCarthy there. And when I look around the rest of the league, Dave, I don't see a whole lot of other places where he'd have that opportunity either. Maybe Cleveland, maybe Pittsburgh, if they don't sign Rodgers. That's kind of the only places I'm seeing as places where they have a real dire need for a quarterback with some decent starting quarterback chops, which Tannehill has. But, if he doesn't come to Minnesota, that would be, I think, disappointing to me and you, Dave, because he seems like a perfect guy for that job. With, first off, former first-round draft pick, so he can relate to the pressure that J.J. McCarthy is going to face this year as a starter and a highly drafted player at the most important position in that sport. And also just the amount of starting experience he has in the NFL with Miami and with Tennessee. Just a lot of experience there on the ups and downs and preparation that he can impart to J.J. McCarthy as a mentor. I think that he'd be a great guy to have there. And it also doesn't hurt that because he didn't play last year, Dave, and you pointed this out before, he wouldn't count against our comp pick formula for 2026. So,
well, I think no matter who they choose, I think they're waiting until after the draft. So none of them will count against the comp pick formula. And Kwesi mentioned that during the presser, he alluded to they're watching the comp picks right now. So
yes,
don't expect a backup quarterback until after the draft is what I'm getting.
Yeah. Although in Tannehill's case, they could sign him now, and that would not, right? But you got to have two to tango, as we've said before, and it doesn't sound like Tannehill's ready to play ball just yet on coming to Minnesota. Now, the Kwesi adofo-mensah did say this week that they're going to be building out the quarterback room. In the coming weeks, I don't expect that they'll draft a quarterback with only 4 picks at this point. Maybe if they add 2 or 3 more, that becomes a different conversation. But right now, I don't see them drafting a quarterback in this draft, especially with the quarterback class being pretty weak. But they'll certainly sign an undrafted guy to add to the room. And then, like you said, after the draft, they probably go after one of the available guys. Now, that list the pickings are getting slimmer and slimmer all the time. Is it Joe Flacco? Is it Carson Wentz? Is it is it Drew Lock? Is it Trey Lance? Is it Tyler Huntley? Actually, Huntley's a guy I've always liked. Is it Teddy Bridgewater? Reunion. We don't know. Is it Brett Rippon, Dave? Now, he is the only other guy who's under contract right now at quarterback for the Vikings. You got to remember that last year, Jaren Hall had made the team after a pretty strong preseason, and the Vikings ended up deciding that Brett Rippon, they preferred Rippon over Jaren Hall and cut Jaren Hall and signed Rippon. And Rippon, so it was a choice by the Vikings to bring Rippon in and let Hall go. So they do like Rippon in some way, shape, or form, and like him as a player. Now, do they like him enough to stick with him as a backup, at least for the time being? That one's a little bit harder for me to buy, just because he's hardly played. Going into 6 seasons in the NFL, he's hardly played. I think he's appeared in 10 games. He started 4. The stats aren't really encouraging. Completion percentage of 58.3, thrown for 4 touchdown passes, 9 interceptions, which is even beyond the Nick Mullins zone as far as throwing to the other team. So those aren't really numbers that give me a lot of make me feel great about Brett Rippon as a back guy you could trust to be a backup. So what I think, Kwesi adofo also mentioned, again, building out that quarterback room, trading, perhaps the Vikings do roll with Rippon and an undrafted guy, even if they can't sign one of these guys like Tannehill or Locke or Huntley that are still out there, although I think they will. But maybe they do wait, like what happened in 2022, wait until after preseason to make a trade for a team that has a surplus of quarterbacks, like what they did with Nick Mullins in 2022 when they traded a 7th rounder, conditional 7th rounder, I think in the 2023 draft to get Mullins and bring him in to be the backup because they weren't happy with Sean Mannion or Kellen Mond. That could be a bit tricky, Dave, because I was just looking at depth charts of the NFL teams, and I did not see many teams that had a surplus of quarterbacks. Surprise, surprise. Buffalo was the only one that really looked at me like they have a quote unquote surplus because they've got Mitch Trubisky. Don't roll your eyes. Mitch Trubisky as the backup to Josh Allen. And then behind him is Mike White, who has played a fair amount of ball in his days. And Vikings fans might remember in 2022, he lit up Ed Donatel defense, who didn't, with like a 400-yard performance at the US Bank Stadium. So that Buffalo might be a team where come the end of preseason, start of the season, they might be looking to see if they can get a late round pick by trading White or maybe Trubisky. But other than that, it's hard to find anybody that's got a surplus that Kwesi adofo-mensah could trade, pretty much a late day 3 pick to get a backup in 2025 to somebody to back up JJ McCarthy. But they got to do something. They've got to address it because they don't, if you're looking for a backup quarterback, Dave, at least right now, all you got is Brett Rippon, and to me, he's not your backup, nor should he be.
I agree. Hey, there's always this guy. There's rumors he's going to be traded.
Yes. Yes. I haven't looked at how I know the Falcons would be on the hook for like all of his salary, I believe.
Right.
But
it would probably be one of those trade and buy salary and get picks back and that sort of deal. But I hope not. Yep, I agree, Sarah. Nope. But I'm also hearing the Browns are interested in that, and so who knows? I think Browns are about interested in anybody they get. First I hear is trade for Dak, and I guess that's fallen through, and now it's Kirk. So, Aaron says Kirk was seen in Minneapolis. Yeah, because I think he still has friends and family nearby or whatever. And Northfield is reporting that Mond looked horrible. Yes, I saw his stats. It's like 159 yards, 0 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions on a full football game.
Is he playing today in the UFL?
Yeah, Brahmas.
I know he'd signed with the Brahmas. I didn't know that they were playing today.
Yep. Game's over.
But okay.
Right now it's ripping. But we're going to get 2 more quarterbacks. So one will probably be that veteran backup, and the other one will be a camp arm for development. That's just it. So just to get everybody's mind straight, we're going to get 2 more. But the veteran and then a camp arm.
And I'm 100% with Sarah on this, and I know she's not the only one, is that there's no way I'm bringing Kirk Cousins into Minnesota. It just, you talk about awkward, it would be...
Oh, it'd be horrible.
Yeah.
It'd be horrible. I don't think it's going to happen.
I think there's less chance of that happening than Rodgers coming to Minnesota, really. But hell, pro sports is a weird place. Mm-hmm. Stuff happens all the time. I would have never thought Brett Favre would play in Minnesota either, but it did happen. So, guess you can't rule anything out, but we're sort of ruling those 2 things out.
Yes, we are. The heck with Rodgers and the heck with Kirk Cousins. That's the show today, folks. Any last words there, Darren?
I should have addressed this, Dave, but there's been a few references about a Asante Samuel signing, and I did yesterday. There was a rumor like he'd been approached by a Vikings fan, saw some player with a Vikings hat or something, and then asked him who he was, and he said his name is Asante, or she asked him if he was a Viking, and he said, well, not yet. Wait a little while, and then he said his name was Asante. So yeah. Get a lot of people probably heard those rumors that the Vikings might be, again, past the draft, that they might be signing Asante Samuel to add to the cornerback room, which I would not be against, by the way.
I'd be for it.
Samuel, I'd be for it, especially if the price is right, and it probably will be post NFL draft. When you look at it, not quite the same, but hey, one of the most important signings the Vikings made last year, they made really, really late. The Stephon Gilmore signing was like, that was a very important signing for them. Didn't cost a lot of money. They waited a long time to make it happen, but they did make it happen. And so sometimes these late signings, well past free agency, can, if you get the right guy for the right amount of money and fit him into the right role, it can work out for you. Asante Samuel, again, I would not be against bringing him in.
No, I think it'd be a great addition to the corner room. I'd love it. Awesome.
But that's another one where I think I have a hard time believing that that'll happen.
Disgusting act. No, we did not all want Brett Favre in 2009. I disagree. I was adamant against it. And if you hit the Wayback Machine, look up Loof's Locker Room. That was my blog back then. And Darren, you were doing what? Grant's Tomb at the time?
I was.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember what my take was on that, but I probably wasn't really. I may have looked at the Favre or Tavares Jackson, Sage Rosenfels, and probably thought it wasn't such a bad idea to bring in Favre, but I don't think I was overjoyed with the thought.
And I
certainly didn't think it was going to turn out like it did.
I was writing for my blog Started writing for Daily Norseman at the time and Sporting News. I was still writing then for them. So I can guarantee you I was against it. And you could ask Ted, G. Lover. I was adamant. And it took him winning me over. And what a marvelous season that was. But
yes.
And then everything was shifted to Chili's at, incompetent boob. And that season proved it. But all right, folks. Hey, I want to thank you very, very much for joining us today. It's a great crowd. Appreciate it to take time out on this Sunday to watch two old bloggers talk about the Minnesota Vikings and join in the conversation. It's absolutely wonderful. It warms our heart. And it's we got another busy week because we got those owners meetings. So we've got more news coming. And we'll see you next Sunday. Now, we'll have a show tomorrow night with the Real 4-0 show. Tuesday night with Sal. And we'll go on from there. What do we say, buddy?
We say SKOL Vikings.
SKOL Vikings.
Like, subscribe, and ring the bell, and rate us on your favorite podcast aggregator. Darren and Dave, thank you for watching this episode of Two Old Bloggers. We look forward to seeing you on every show on the new Vikings First and SKOL. You can find our podcasts as part of the Fans First Sports Network. Sports takes for the fan, from the fan. SKOL, everybody!